if you found yourself in a bit of a financial hole because of gambling, then watch this video. So many of the comments I get underneath my videos are relating to financial losses, to gambling losses, and most of the videos I've put on this channel that get the highest number of views are about financial gambling losses. Now, I won't bleat on in this video about how the biggest losses in your life aren't financial, because that's not what you're here for. All right, but don't make the same mistakes with money that I did, because it makes your life and your situation a whole load worse. And in this video, I want to explain exactly what I mean. I want to share my experiences of, dare I say, financial mismanagement and the mistakes that I made in trying to fix what I perceive to be the problem, whilst simultaneously burying my head in the sand and completely ignoring the root cause of the issues that I was causing for myself and for my life. But firstly, of course, I want to say hi. Hope you're keeping safe. Hope you're keeping sane. Thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel despite my absence. And thank you to everyone who likes, subscribes, does all that great YouTube stuff. Anyone who's signed up to Patreon, all of that great bits and pieces. And I'll probably do a bit more shameless self-promotion at the end of this video. But let's crack on. Now, if you've been with the channel for a while, then you'll probably have heard me talk about a lot of these topics before. But I think these are incredibly important subjects, and I think this is one of the key mistakes, and certainly one of the major regrets I have in the long term when I look back on years and years of gambling and of addiction. So I want to touch upon them again, not just for the new subscribers, just to reiterate that this is, not something that we maybe immediately consider when it comes to dealing with a gambling addiction. So what am I talking about? Now, of course, as I said, gambling isn't necessarily a financial issue, but there's no doubt that it creates significant financial issues. And that can be sort of short term, you literally can't pay the rent, or you haven't got money to put in your car for fuel to get to work, or whatever it is. Or simply that you can't make some sort of social occasion that you promise you turn up to, but the money you put aside for it, you've now spent on a fob tea or a 10-minute session on an online casino. So let's give a stereotypical example from my perspective. This is what I used to do. Now, everyone who gambles, generally, if you gambled and had an addiction for a significant period of time, you are likely to accrue debt. And if you haven't accrued debt to this point, then that's brilliant, because you have a much better kicking off point from which to start your recovery. But just supposing you've accrued debt. Now, the common belief would be that you've accrued that debt because you borrowed money to feed your addiction. And that's quite a rational reasoning, isn't it? It's quite a reasonable conclusion to draw, that the reason you've got in debt is because you've had the urge to gamble and you've borrowed money to gamble. However, in my case, as I've explained in many occasions before, that really wasn't how it worked. What would happen is I'd actually have some money. Now, it might be an overdraft, it might be, money because I've only just got paid and haven't had a chance to spunk it all yet. All right, but maybe the money is actually mine, and I'd feel quite good about myself for the first time, probably in the better part of a month. And since the last time I did my brains, right, I actually had a few quid in my pocket. So what do? Well, I treat myself to a bit of gambling, maybe accompanied by a couple of pints and a takeaway or whatever. And what happens is I then proceed to do what gamblers generally do 90% of the time, is play and play and play and play, gamble, bet and bet, until we've lost the available funds that we have. And this is where I used to start doing the damage. Not only because I could no longer necessarily afford all the aforementioned things that I had earmarked that money that month for, or that week for, or whatever, all right, but also the psychological damage of, I've lost, I don't know, let's shout out 400 quid, right? I've been into the bookies and I've put 400 quid in a fob tea and lost the lot. All right, now, obviously, we don't always lose, but if you are an addict, the chances are on many occasions you will play it until you do. So I've lost this £400, money that I had, money that I could possibly, at a stretch afford. But not only have I got a hole in my finances, I have the psychological damage of all the things that I could have and should have done with that money. So, rather than sort of take it on the chin, think, what an idiot, what can I do to stop myself from doing this next time, which in retrospect, and again, this isn't coming from a high horse because I did this for years and years and years, right? What I should have done was think, right, how can I prevent myself from doing this next payday? Okay, which is why you get the incessant payday videos from me. Apologies for that. is I think, right, how can I get that money back? All right, now, of course, there's chasing your losses, and that's a very, very well-trodden path, and something that we and everyone who talks about gambling has talked about a million times before. But my solution was often more direct. I'll just have to get the money from somewhere else. And if I'd lost £400, I'll go and immediately try and find a payday lender or a credit card lender, or the best case scenario, a friend or family member who would lend me the money that I'd lost to put me back on parity. Now, like I say, financially, this would resolve my short-term problems because I've suddenly got the money that I'd earmarked for other things back. But also mentally, it would put me on a level playing field. I could almost disregard, forget, brush under the carpet the substantial financial loss that I just incurred at the hands of my addiction, allowing me, in effect, to forget about it, to not acknowledge it as a problem. But it is a problem, and it's a problem that has short, medium, and long-term issues associated with it. Okay. Now, in the very short term, of course, if you borrowed some money, you're probably going to need to pay it back. All right, but we can worry about that later. Future Phil can worry about that. The first payment on this payday loan isn't due for another month, or the minimum payment on the credit card's really small, so I can afford that. Medium term, this is going to mount up and up and up, and as it did in my case, if every time you lose, your immediate desire is to get yourself back to parity, you will start borrowing from less and less reputable, lenders. So you start with your banks, you start with your overdrafts and your reputable credit cards, you end up with your payday lenders and all sorts of other random subprime crap, right? All the bottom feeders who will lend you 400 quid, but they want 1,200 quid back in 3 months' time. So that's the medium-term damage that you do. Or like I say, best case scenario, you've borrowed it off a friend or family member, because not only do you become significantly more liable for that, because it's not some faceless corporation that you feel you can just mug off time after time, all right, but also because you're not going to be paying interest and they are liable to be more understanding of your plight. However, in many instances, it won't be that. All right, and that's where we kind of think, oh God, this is, we've just made the problem worse in effect, because not only have you now got debt just to put yourself back on mental and financial parity, you've also helped perpetuate your addiction, because you borrow that £400. What do? Do you think, oh, that was a close call, right, okay, I'm going to have to pay this back, but at least I've fixed the damage? No, of course you don't. You've got cash back in your pocket. And whether you psychologically, consciously go back out to chase those losses, you now have availability of gambling again. Suddenly you're back in the gambling seat. You've got the funds, you have the immediate capital to go out and to feed that desire, feed that urge, feed that addiction. And then sometimes I could go through this cycle 2 or 3 times, borrowing again and again and again. And what started off as maybe a £400 loss in this example could end up to be a £1,600 debt, because I've done it 3 times. I've borrowed the money and then immediately gone back out and gambled. Like I say, consciously or subconsciously chasing, or maybe simply because I had the facility to placate the urges. Okay, now long term, this is where the real problems lay, and this is why I'm making this video, even though I've touched on these topics before, because this is the situation I now find myself in. Of course, borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and let's face it, in most instances, and this is speaking for me, but I'm sure it will resonate with many of you, we're not paying these things back as we maybe even initially intended. This time I'm going to keep up payments on this credit card. This time I can make repayments on this loan when I get paid. But of course, the gambling takes hold. We lose more money and we're unable to make payments. So long term, our credit rating drops and drops and drops and drops. Now, there is something to be said for having a low credit rating as a gambler. If we can't borrow money, we can't perpetuate the addiction, we can't cause ourselves more damage. However, when and if, and touch wood, and Godspeed, you get into recovery, then you'll suddenly find how much, particularly in the Western world, our lives and our society is built on credit. And I'm not just talking about financing a flash car or getting credit out on a new kitchen or whatever. All right, I'm talking about getting a rental property. I'm talking about getting a mobile phone contract. All these things where at least a respectable credit score are required. And this is damage that takes forever, absolutely forever to undo. And sometimes, in many cases, particularly if you're unable to repay this mountain of debt that you're slowly accruing, you may never actually be back in a position where these opportunities are open to you. And like I say, I'm not just talking about the flash material stuff like financing a new Merc. I'm talking about actual, everyday things that for many of us are a requirement. Like I say, renting a house or a flat or an apartment or whatever. They will do a credit check on you. And if your credit score is sufficiently low, you may find you're unable to rent somewhere. Now, that's one of the serious ones, but there are other things as well in life that a credit score is essential for. So not only are you causing yourself long-term financial damage, but all you're doing is burying your head in the sand, not addressing the root cause of the problem, but also making the problem worse, not only by accruing more debt, but also by feeding the addiction with additional funds from here, there, and everywhere. All the time ignoring the root cause of the problem. Okay, so you cannot borrow your way out of a gambling addiction, and nor should you try, because every time that you do so, you are burning future bridges in terms of your credit score, but also in terms of your future borrowing capacity. There are times in life, quite often, where we do need a little financial assistance, and that's what credit cards and short-term loans and, dare I say, even friends and family who are happy to sub you a few quid are for. But the longer you go down this road, the more people you borrow from and don't pay back, the more organisations you mug off time after time, month after month, all these doors, you're not aware of it at the time, because all you're doing is desperately scrabbling about trying to find some money from somewhere, but all these doors are closing behind you. And it's only when you look back and you need some financial assistance that you realise that you've burnt all your bridges. They're all gone. Now, I spoke to someone not that long ago who actually gave up their job. Now, this isn't recommended, by the way. They gave up their job because of their gambling addiction. And actually the rationale, whilst I wasn't sure that giving up your job is the ideal solution, but the rationale was strong. What was the point in continuing to earn money when it was all just going to be lost anyway? And whilst I don't recommend that, I think there is some underlying logic there. If we are unable to control our gambling, if we are unable to control the addiction, so we continue to make these financial decisions, which in the cold light of day away from the addiction would be a terrible decision. If we continue to cause ourselves damage and allow this debt to pile up and the credit score to go down and down, all these bridges to be burnt, then why bother earning money in the first place? Because all you're doing is feeding the addiction. All you are doing is perpetuating this cycle. So, the underlying message of this video, which I probably could have done in about 2 minutes, my apologies, is do not try and address the financial situation of your gambling addiction before you address the root cause, or at the very least, the addiction itself. Before you have blocks in place, before you put barriers in place, put methods in place, be that all the blocks I talk about, giving someone control of your finances, going to Gamblers Anonymous, getting counselling, doing all these great things that are available to you, and there is a lot of support out there. All right, but there's also a lot of practical things you can do with regards blocking gambling accounts, blocking gambling transactions from your bank accounts, self-excluding from everywhere, for handing your finances over to a loved one or a trusted friend or partner, whatever. All right, doing all this stuff. Until you are ready to do that, until you have decided that you want to do that and you want to get into recovery, do not try and address the financial situation. All right, because all you're going to be doing is maybe freeing up funds to completely undo the good intentions that you have at certain points to stop this addiction. Okay, in the meantime, burning bridges and building up debt that you may eventually struggle to repay. All right, so once you've dealt with the root cause of the problem, then maybe you can address the financial issues. Now, of course, there might be more immediate things to deal with. Obviously, if you owe, priority debts like council tax and things like that, they will need to be addressed. Okay, but there's not a lot that can't be at least deferred by 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever, by talking to your creditors. And that gives you a little bit of space to address the actual problem before you then have to start facing up and repaying the financial problem, which isn't the main problem, but it is a hell of a side effect, a hell of a symptom of a gambling addiction. I hope that makes a lot of sense. Great to be back. Look forward to bringing you some new videos again soon. Stay safe, stay sane. If you want to support the channel, there'll be a link to my Patreon in the description below. If not, just like, subscribe, do all that great YouTubery stuff. But most importantly, keep safe and keep sane. And I always say, and I think this is quite critical, is I don't make these videos to preach. The fact I'm talking about this is because it's a mistake that I made for years and years and years, and it's caused me problems. It's caused me a mountain of debt, which I'm getting through quite well. But it's also caused me a massive decline in my credit rating, which means I now struggle with various things. I can't finance a car, I can't lease anything, I can't, I don't think I can rent a washing machine. I don't know, I've not tried, but it's caused me a lot of problems, and I could have quite easily avoided these problems, if I didn't repeat the same behaviours over and over and over again, which didn't actually afford me the financial relief that they were intended to do, because all I did was gamble more and more and more. Hope that makes sense, guys. Stay safe, stay sane, and thanks for all your support, and speak to you soon.